Your Excellencies, please take your seats. Your Excellencies, please take your seats. Our session will begin shortly. In the name of God, most gracious, most compassionate, I call to order the second plenary meeting of the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries in 2023. Distinguished heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The conference shall now commence its general debate under Agenda Item 8. In accordance with the organization of work of the conference contained in Document A, Conf 219-2023-1,
/A.
Statements in the general debate should not exceed 5 minutes. Speakers with longer statements are encouraged to read a shorter version of their text and to submit the full length of their statement to e-statements-ldc5@un.org for posting on the Journal of the United Nations. To assist speakers in managing their time, a timer is being projected on the screen. I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Ismail Omar Jela, President and Head of Government of the Republic of Djibouti, to address the conference.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين.
In the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful, and sending blessings upon the Holy Prophet.
Highness, Your Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of State and Government, Excellency, Mr. President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Your Excellency, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, delegates. At the outset, I would like to extend my warmest thanks to the State of Qatar for the very warm welcome that I and my delegation received. I thank them also for the quality of the provisions made for this conference. There were 25 in 1971. The number grew to 50 in 2007. The category of the LDCs now contains 46 members, of which 33 are African states. Since the establishment of this category a little more than 50 years ago, there have been 4 10-year plans. These programs of action all had as their common denominator the promotion of the socio-economic development of the most vulnerable countries. This ambition drew its raison d'être from the very heart of the Charter of the United Nations in Article 1, line 3, which states that the purpose of the United Nations is to ensure international cooperation by resolving international problems of economic, social, intellectual, or humanitarian problems in nature. Today, 50 years later, the situation is clear. The international support measures set up to accompany these LDCs have not produced the expected results. We are below the aims set out in many of the priority areas of action set out in previous conferences, especially as regards productive capacity, agriculture, food security, basic products, mobilization of financial resources for development and structural transformation, international global trade and climate change. In these conditions, the goal of accelerating emergence from the category of LDCs is facing many challenges. We should collectively and critically evaluate the outcomes of our previous plans and take corrective measures in order to make them an effective tool for stimulating the development of the LDCs. That is indeed the ambition of the Doha Plan of Action. Indicators show that external crises have violently affected the efforts of our countries. Some of them had been able to see the first signs of a structural transformation towards tangible progress towards economic emergence. This constitutes the first recession in 25 years for the African continent. We call on our bilateral and multilateral partners to take account of these factors as they formulate their support strategies for LDCs. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the adoption by the General Assembly of the United Nations of the Doha Programme of Action on the 17th of March 2022 aligns with the last decade of Agenda 2030, which is intended to be a decade of action. As you know, this 10-year program relies on 6 priority areas that should ensure that member states of the LDCs can put in place a root and branch transformation that is lasting and sustainable with a view to irreversible sustainable development. The slogan for our work is from potential to prosperity. The Doha Plan of Action seeks to strengthen the resilience of LDCs in light of the multiple crises that we have been witnessing in recent years. The LDCs should not now be limited to just the category of countries that receive aid. This narrow and debilitating vision should be changed. It should be considered, these countries should be considered as an area of high yield investment. We should therefore afford greater importance to productive investment. In order to achieve such an objective, it is imperative that we deal with the weaknesses of a multilateral trade system that is not serving the purpose of development and not encouraging international solidarity for the most vulnerable. As regards trade, the member states of the WTO must renew their commitment to swiftly and fully implementing all of the decisions taken at the ministerial conferences for the lesser developed countries, especially as regard access to markets free of tariffs on a sustainable basis. The developed economies, financial institutions and multilateral banks must strengthen their support for reforms that allow the heavily indebted LDCs to avoid further worsening of their budgetary situations, and also the commitments in the area of ODA should be respected. For some 20 years, my country has been resolutely committed to a vast area of transformation to enable economic and environmental sustainability. Since the adoption of the Istanbul Plan of Action in 2011, through the SDGs in 2015, Djibouti has aligned itself with the spirit and principles of Agenda 2030 and fully implemented the SDGs. The new national development plan called Djibouti ICI, or Djibouti Here, covering the period 2020 to 2024, that emphasizes a better distribution of the fruits of growth in order to better respond to the challenges and to fulfill the full potential of these countries, and consolidating the previous plan as well as those put in place during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks to these this port infrastructure, Djibouti has played a crucial role in the logistics chain during the COVID-19 epidemic and enhanced international trade. Our determination to reinforce the capacity of the country in the area of port services is indefatigable. The government will continue to invest in this sector. There are 2 structural projects that are also being finalized. This is a naval program intended to repair and maintain vessels, as well as an oil storage terminal in the industrial sector of Damajog. We would like to seize this opportunity to renew our call to our multilateral and bilateral partners so that they may support Djibouti in its policy of port development in light of the strategic position of the country and its role in international trade. Furthermore, we highlight the essential need to support LDCs in their projects for building structural infrastructure, especially through the intermediary of access, facilitating significant concessional resources. Despite this progress, we need to mobilize additional resources in order to strengthen the resilience of the country in light of the persistence of climate, environmental challenges, as well as the continuous flow of refugees. We wish, in particular, to highlight the following challenges: the impact of drought on food security and the living conditions of Djibouti's population, the cost for the public finances of the country that has been generated by the policy of welcoming climate refugees and conflict refugees from the sub-region, and the impact of climate change on the infrastructure of the country due to flooding, and the fund for loss and damage launched by the COP27 must be operationalized as soon as possible. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude my statement by reiterating my call for strong mobilization for the effective realization of the Doha Plan of Action. It is now down to us to concretely and tangibly show that while multilateralism is going through a painful crisis, it can nevertheless change the lives of billions of men and women who have good reason to believe in it and have hope. I thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency the President of Djibouti, and I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Wavel Ramkalawan, President of the Republic of Seychelles, to address the conference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the Emir of the State of Qatar, Mr. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me first of all to extend our thanks for the warm welcome and the kind hospitality my delegation has received so far. Ladies and gentlemen, our world has changed drastically since the 4th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries and the adoption of the Istanbul Political Declaration and Programme of Action for the Least Developed Countries for the decade 2011-2020. Since then, only 3 countries have graduated from LDC status. In an age where our economies, priorities, and challenges are interlinked, no country should be left behind. All governments and partners must respond decisively to address the challenges that we collectively face. 20% of LDCs are small island developing states. I come from one of these islands. And 2/3 of LDCs are African. Seychelles has graduated to the high income status. However, our presence here is a sign of solidarity, regional and global support for our fellow Seeds and Africans, and a strong expression of seeking greater understanding and cooperation. No state should be punished for progress. Let not the so-called graduation be another hurdle in meeting the needs of our people and its communities. It is plain that the factors hindering the development of LDCs and seeds across all continents and regions are similar in nature, despite their having the potential for rapid growth and development. This potential could be realized if we had equal access to resources and opportunities that lead to economic growth and stability and improve the lives of our citizens. Such inequality has resulted in a development imbalance worsened by the unprecedented levels of greenhouse gas emissions, leaving our climate and ecosystems in peril. Developing countries stand to be disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change and must now face the challenges of global warming, for which we share minimal responsibility. The goal of graduating from the LDC category and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals has never been more difficult in the face of such existential crisis. A different set of challenges manifests itself in trying to maintain the status of graduation and in pursuing an upwards trajectory. Support needs to be extended in order for such countries to sustain their progress and thus ensure that traditional donor-recipient relationships are transformed into mutual partnerships. Countries such as ours continue to remain vulnerable in spite of their graduation to the high income status. Climate change threatens our livelihoods and existence, regardless of economic status. The key difference is that many developed countries have the means to build their resilience in the face of disasters and external shocks. We cannot continue relying on temporary solutions to address the systemic failures and shortcomings within the existing development cooperation mechanisms. The time has come for the international organizations like the OECD and multi-development banks to stop using only GDP per capita as a measurement of development, thus restricting access to concessionary financing for development needs. One size does not fit all. We need to reorganize the needs of countries with unique vulnerabilities, vulnerabilities affecting SIDS and LDCs alike. That is why, at every opportunity, I advocate for the global adoption of a multidimensional vulnerability index. This offers a targeted approach that will not only complement but improve the efficacy development cooperation, permitting countries in vulnerable situations to address concessional financing and address our needs. I also wish to emphasize the importance of South-South cooperation. Solidarity and unity between countries of the South will provide for stronger and enduring partnerships, and collective advocacy of our shared interests will contribute to mobilizing resources and ensure they are distributed equitably to serve our development needs. This fifth conference is a welcome and positive step in the direction we all want to go. The Doha Programme of Action is the roadmap we have to follow to develop our full potential and resilience while progressing on the trajectory to sustainable development. SIDS and LDCs share similar concerns, but from different perspectives, and it is imperative that we work together to mobilize maximum, effective, equitable, long-term support to lock in growth and prosperity. It is also imperative that we take ownership and primary responsibility for our respective countries and peoples through good governance, inclusiveness, transparency, respect for human rights, the eradication of corruption, and in standing as strong advocates in defending climate change, what I call the Seychelles way, that we will embrace progress and sustainable development. It is my hope that in the not-too-distant future, we shall have a gathering of strong and resilient states with poverty and underdevelopment no longer an affliction of the many. I thank you.
I thank the President of the Republic of Seychelles for his statement, and I now give the floor to invite the President of the Republic of Slovenia to address the conference.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The 5th UN Conference of the Least Developed Countries takes place against the backdrop of multiple crises and global geopolitical challenges. We have witnessed cascading crises, and no country has been spared. Although least developed countries are not responsible for those crises, they remain most vulnerable to external shocks. In addition to this, the COVID-19 pandemic still perseveres among us. This is not merely a health crisis. It causes serious disruption of economies, societies, and individuals everywhere, and in particular in the least developed countries. The combination of insecurities such as climate change, rising energy prices, food crisis, and ultimately many wars and conflicts have reversed progress in achieving sustainable development goals. This is particularly the case when it comes to poverty reduction, inclusive and equitable quality education, food security, and health. Without determined and coordinated action, the gap between developed high-income countries and least developed countries will indeed continue to widen, and will the number and percentage of the world's population living in the least developed countries. Its inhabitants so often have no choice but to leave their homes, not because they want to, but because they have to. Regarding the coordinated and truly global action, let me be clear. Its main precondition is solidarity. We must accept historical facts. We must take the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities seriously. Only then will effective, rule-based multilateralism become truly effective, and the results equitable. Excellencies, Slovenia firmly supports the belief that the ownership, leadership, and primary responsibility for development in least developed countries rests with the least developed countries themselves. At the same time, let me underscore that Slovenia, as a developed state, like other developed countries, carries great responsibility and is ready to contribute to building peaceful and resilient societies and assist in green transition. Climate justice is a prerogative that we all must internalize. Allow me to address one topic that is high on the agenda at this conference: science, technology, and innovation. Financing for development needs to be accompanied by technological innovation, expertise, and technical assistance. Slovenia's scientists have developed solutions that could be of wider interest: satellite imaging, remote sensing, and artificial intelligence tools. That being said, it is important to discuss science not only as an opportunity, but also as a challenge. Artificial intelligence, for example, is broadly used in production processes, global chains, logistics, and in our everyday tasks, such as searching in web browsers. However, if in the wrong hands, it may have damaging effects. We need to be aware of that, and we need to be prepared for that in the future. As pointed out in the Doha Programme of Action, private sector, civil society, and academia can make a valuable contribution to meet such challenges. Last but certainly not least, Slovenia is a strong advocate of human rights-based approaches to development. The principles of non-discrimination and inclusiveness are essential to delivering on our pledge to leave no one behind. I particularly welcome the commitments of the Doha Programme of Action to promote the equality and empowerment of women and girls. We reaffirmed that gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls and the full realization of their human rights are essential to achieving sustained, inclusive, and equitable economic growth and sustainable development for all of us. Excellencies, we all share one planet, only one planet that we do have. The Doha Programme of Action sets out ambitious targets and commitments. Achieving them is our shared responsibility based on the principle of multilateralism, with the United Nations at the core of our combined endeavors. The success of the international community in addressing global challenges depends on the success of our weakest and most marginalized and hence vulnerable members. As we are gathered here in Doha, we must take a sincere pledge to work together and use all our resources and capacities to achieve our common goals. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the President of Slovenia, and I give the floor now to His Excellency Archange Daira, the President of Central Africa, to deliver his statement before the conference. Sir, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of Qatar, Your Excellency, President of the Republic of Malawi, Acting President of the least developed countries, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The Central African Republic is honored to take part in the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries, which is being held in this wonderful city of Doha, Qatar. I would therefore like to express my sincerest gratitude to the government and the friendly people of Qatar for the warm welcome and the excellent organization of this conference. Mr. President, our conference is taking place at a time that is particularly marked by climate shocks, geopolitical tensions, and unprecedented energy, health, and food challenges. The chosen theme, namely From Potential to Prosperity, reflects our common desire to overcome the resource curse by seeking innovative solutions to transform our natural potential into real wealth in order to meet the legitimate aspirations of our populations to prosperity. Mr. President, since the return to constitutional order on March 30th, 2016, the Central African Republic has made remarkable progress in the areas of combating poverty, strengthening the rule of law, the fight against impunity, gender equality, women's empowerment, maternal and child health, girls' education and training, the promotion of youth, digital development, good governance, security, and national reconciliation. All these efforts have been undermined by the unjust and illegitimate embargo on arms for the Central African Armed Forces and on Central African diamonds for 10 years. A victim of geostrategic ambitions related to its natural resources, the Central African Republic wonders how the least developed countries can move from potential to prosperity if they continue to face foreign interference that keeps them in dependence, insecurity, and instability. How can one explain or understand why the Central African Republic, endowed with an immense geological wealth of more than 470 minerals, including gold and diamonds, still untapped strategic raw materials such as cobalt, oil, and uranium, more than 15 million hectares of arable land suitable for agricultural development, more than 2.5 million hectares of forests representing 6.75% of the Congo Basin's tropical rainforests and 1.71% of the planet, remains, more than 60 years after its independence, one of the poorest countries in the world. As you know, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Central African Republic has always been considered, and wrongly so, by certain Western powers as a reserve of strategic raw materials. Since its independence, it has been subjected to systematic looting, facilitated by the political instability maintained by certain Western states or their corporations, which finance terrorist armed groups whose primary leaders are foreign mercenaries. Recurrent attacks by armed terrorist groups seek to make the country ungovernable, to prevent the state from exercising its right of sovereignty over natural resources and its legitimate right to self-determination, which has been recognized by the relevant international legal instruments. Mr. President, how can an LDC move from potential to prosperity without financial and technical support from international partners? For 3 years now, the European Union, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, key partners of the Central African Republic, have, under pressure from certain Western powers, suspended their budgetary assistance, thus demonstrating their willingness to support geopolitical and geostrategic struggles. The disinformation and demonization campaigns carried out by certain foreign media in order to discourage serious investors have stripped the state of its immense wealth and precious means of investing in education, in agriculture, energy, transport, and health, which are all essential sectors for the development of an LDC. The Central African people have therefore been taken hostage. Their efforts to move from potential to prosperity to achieve the Millennium Development Goals have been seriously hampered by geostrategic aims which they have nothing to do with. Mr. President, the Central African Republic has been orphaned when it comes to official development assistance for least developed countries. I call on international partners to lift the measures that are suspending budgetary assistance and to increase their support and assistance to the government, in particular by making the Green Climate Fund available in order to allow for the implementation of national adaptation measures and to build a resilient, inclusive, and sustainable economy. I would like to ask for the mobilization of the least developed countries to support our legitimate request for the full lifting of the embargo on arms and diamonds in order to give the government the necessary financial resources to implement its national defense and security plan, as well as its development programs. I wish to reiterate the Central African Republic's support for the Doha Program of Action, which during the coming decade will govern our actions in the fight against poverty under the slogan of leaving no one behind. Thank you.
I thank the President of Central African Republic, and I would now like to invite His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Dibi, the President of Chad, to address the conference.
Your Royal Highness Emir of Qatar, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I would like first of all to take this opportunity to thank and to share my appreciation to His Highness the Emir of Qatar, Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, as well as to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for their well-coordinated efforts and for the impeccable convening of this important conference. This meeting is of great importance. This is because it offers us an opportunity to have discussions free of any limitations about the true obstacles that are hampering the development of our respective countries. At the same time, it allows our partners to assess their multiple commitments to support LDCs and in overcoming the challenges linked to development. My dear brother, Emir, you said this morning that we cannot have development without peace, and while there is still civil war, it is for this reason has for decades invested in building the capacity of its army. The fact that my country is upstanding and stable, it is thanks to God and to its army. I would also like to confirm that Doha is the capital of mediation and peace. The fact that Chad today is at peace is indeed thanks to the generosity of Qatar, which enabled the mediation between Chadian brothers. This in turn led on the 8th of August 2022 to the Doha Agreement with 40 political and military groups. These groups are today represented in all of the bodies and organs of the transition in my country. I also wish to make special mention of the government of Qatar and thank them for their support leading to the signature of the Doha Peace Agreement between the Sons of Chad. This agreement played a decisive role in the maintenance of peace in my country. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 5th Conference of the United Nations on the Least Developed Countries, the LDCs, is devoted to implementation of the Doha Plan of Action. This plan of action represents a decisive framework for our countries. This 10-year program, 2022-2031, contains pillars which are absolutely crucial for the well-being of our populations and for the economic development of our countries. As regards my country, effective implementation of this action plan is directly in line with the 2030 vision that we have entitled The Chad We Want, and the resulting mechanisms, especially the National Development Plan 2024 to 2028, which we intend to launch at the end of this year. Beyond the seasonal shocks that remind us of the insufficiencies and fragilities of our countries are deploying huge efforts in order to implement the Doha Action Plan. These efforts ought to be reinforced by making available additional concessional resources which can leverage local development and strengthen human capital. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in order to achieve the goals set in the Doha Plan of Action, Chad is firmly committed on the path to development. To this end, the transition government has strengthened the legal and institutional mechanisms that currently exist in order to ensure the inclusion of all of the sons and daughters of the country in the process of political, economic, social and cultural development. In this regard, in 2022, the government recruited thousands of young people to the civil service and financed several development-generating projects led by young people. In addition, infrastructure building projects for roads and energy have been relaunched, as well as have been ambitious reform programs for the modernization of the civil service, promotion of good governance and management focused on the results in combating corruption. It is worth highlighting that Chad still holds huge untapped potential. Several vital sectors such as agriculture, livestock breeding, energy, industry and technology still need to be explored. The government therefore reiterates its commitment and strong will to facilitate investments by all those who decide to invest in our country. The government encourages private and state capital funds to seize opportunities for investment that have been made available through the special economic zones in several provinces of Chad. With this in mind, we have set in place more subtle and flexible mechanisms in order to stabilize the business environment in Chad and to attract investors. It is also with this outlook in mind that we are militating in favor of the development of sub-regional markets as well as for the effective implementation of the Continental African Free Trade Zone, ZLECAf. Despite this positive socioeconomic trend led by the resolutions for inclusive and sovereign national dialogue that we held in 2022, our country is still facing obstacles that limit our progress. These are natural disasters resulting from climate change in the LDCs, such as my country. Our countries are bearing the full brunt of the harmful and multifaceted consequences of climate change without really causing it. Indeed, Chad has seen several cases of flooding that have severely affected the majority of our provinces recently. Our efforts towards development have also been hampered by the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and the security challenges posed by terrorism in the region. The burden of humanitarian pressure that we face, and which is characterized by the fact that we have received on our territory some 600,000 refugees and more than 400,000 internally displaced persons. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot conclude without recalling that the priority areas set by the Doha Plan of Action actually go beyond the LDCs, but actually seek to overcome almost all of the difficulties that the world is facing today. In order to achieve this, the effective implementation of this action plan calls for greater international solidarity, a sincere partnership with dynamism and innovation. The Doha gathering should not just be another forum of statements that have no impact. It would also be pointless for it to be just another session of promises that, again, are not kept. The populations and people living in the LDCs do not need more conferences or even more commitments to be listed. The people in our countries need concrete action that will have a positive impact on their daily lives. Finally, allow me to express our appreciation to Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who, despite the difficulties, has been able to keep focus and to continue to be engaged with courage and determination and devotion to defending the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. This is also the time to support the initiative regarding the Rebound project for the SDGs, which foresees the mobilization of more than $500 billion annually in support of the LDCs. God bless you all. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the President of the Transitional Military Council, and now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hota, the President of Timor-Leste, to address the conference.
Your Highness, estimado Secretary-Geral, Presidentes, Primeiros Ministros, Ministers, distinguished participants, I'm accompanied here by our Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation and the Minister of Finance. As one of the 46 LDCs gathered in Doha, among whom we count member states of the G7+, I'm pleased to share Timor-Leste's experience. In particular, I would like to highlight our progress towards achieving the SDGs, while also describing the challenges confronting us and the policy direction needed to facilitate structural transformation. For Timor-Leste, pathways towards LDC graduation and sustainable development are clearly identified in our development framework. The Strategic Development Plan, which envisions Timor-Leste as an upper-middle-income country with a healthy and educated population by 2030. Currently, the SDP is being revised to bring it in line with today's realities while keeping its strategic ambition. To realize this vision, we need to address several key areas, including economic development, social protection, environmental sustainability, and governance. The SDP aims to A, develop a diversified and inclusive economy that is less dependent on oil and gas revenues. B, improve infrastructures to connect people and markets. C, build a skilled and healthy workforce. And D, promote social protection for the most vulnerable members of society. All critical elements to facilitate structural transformation, well aligned with Priority Area 3 and other areas of the Doha Programme of Action. We have made significant achievements in key development areas over the last 2 decades. However, we still need to address several challenges. For instance, despite a significant decrease in poverty, multidimensional poverty is still high at 45.8%. the highest in the Southeast Asian region, and the consequences of COVID pandemic have further undermined the country's progress. Significant improvements have been made to promote accessibility, connectivity, and growth, including increasing the share of the population with access to clean water facilities to 78%, households with access to basic sanitation to 54%. Electricity reaches 96.1% of the country, according to the World Bank, and over 85% of the population now has access to electricity. And nearly 500 kilometers of national and 950 kilometers of municipal roads have been constructed and rehabilitated. Telecommunication signal coverage has also been expanded to 97% of the country. The modern, fully automated new Tibar Bay port began operations in late 2022, the most critical sea transportation infrastructure ever built in Timor-Leste. In addition, a submarine fiber optic cable system project connecting Darwin and Timor-Leste has started. Work on expansion and modernization of Dili Airport has been initiated. These major infrastructures will enable global and regional market connectivity that is vital for our economy and trade. Despite progress in the development of key infrastructure, numerous challenges persist. On the education front, improvement in primary school attendance is the most notable progress, but the country is lagging in attendance rates at preschool. Quality teaching and poor learning environment also contribute to the challenges of education. Similarly, considerable progress has been made in strengthening health delivery systems. but more efforts are required to reduce health inequalities and address non-communicable diseases, nutrition, and sexual and reproductive health. Despite considerable progress, malnutrition and food insecurity rate in Timor-Leste is reportedly among the highest in the world. These are still among the most pressing issues faced by the country. Timor-Leste Food and Nutrition Survey conducted in 2020 showed the prevalence of stunting rates among children under 5 is 47%. Every second child is stunted. Malnutrition is impeding our children's true potential. This is simply unacceptable, and practical, sustainable solutions are needed to address child malnutrition in the country. We envisage a Timor-Leste where every child accesses healthy food to learn better, have the opportunity to go to school, and acquire an education in a conducive environment by 2030. Fragility and vulnerability in the country's political, social, economic pillars remain a challenge, compounded by unforeseen external shocks. With the current development progress, I must say that the prospects for Timor-Leste towards achieving SDGs in 2030 is uncertain. Let us be frank. If we really mean it when we use the words international partners or partnership, then the many parts of this partnership must equally share success stories and failure stories. I notice that our partners have a tendency to cast all blame on the recipient partner for failures and avoid scrutiny of their own aid programs that certainly might have contributed to the failures. ODA commitments never recovered from the subprime meltdown of 2008-9. No one is talking now about the desert mirage of 0.7% national GDP for ODA. Development budgets were diverted to the refugee crisis in Europe and for fighting violent extremism. Lenders have not shown neither heart, humanity, nor wisdom in writing off or restructuring debts held by G7 fragile countries, LDCs, and highly indebted countries. COVID-19 pandemic threw back hundreds of millions of fellow human beings into extreme poverty. Yet, CEOs of lender institutions were unmoved to consider writing off debts. Supply chain disruption, shipping containers, stratospheric price increases have not moved the banks, the rich and the powerful, to think rationally that unless all act as part of same humanity, insensitivity and reckless avarice will sink the global ship. As if COVID-19 pandemic and natural catastrophes were not enough, we woke up to the insanity of the Ukraine war, reverberating around the world. Our country has suffered from recession with non-oil GDP contracting by 8.6% in 2020, despite the slight pickup in 2021 with a rebound of 2.9% and 3.3% in 2022, the outlook remains sluggish. Achievements made by the country since independence were dealt a blow, exposing structural vulnerabilities of our economy. In addition, just like many other G7 fragile states and other LDCs, climate change poses an existential threat. Indeed, as UNCTAD's LDC report 2022 shows, LDCs are at the forefront of climate change. This downturn and the decline in government revenue from oil and gas have undermined the country's preparedness for LDC graduation and progress towards the SDGs. In particular, they point to our heavy dependence on the petroleum sector and the government spending. These challenges show that structural transformation is a long-term objective with a complex process to fast-track. Indeed, the pace of structural transformation in Timor-Leste has been very slow, with a large proportion of the workforce employed in agriculture characterized by low productivity. According to the world data, before the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, share of tourism to GDP increased slightly to 5% from 4.5% in 2006. Manufacturing have not grown in the last 20 years. Its contribution to GDP accounted for less than 2%, as reported by the World Bank. These sectors are essential catalysts for future growth and economic transformation in Timor-Leste. Concerted efforts are required to invest strategically in infrastructure such as special economic zones, power generation, transport connectivity that can foster productive capacity. Efficient legislation and a whole-of-government approach to improve coordination will be critical on the institutional front. These are also necessary to provide decent jobs for the country's young population. Harnessing opportunities offered by green and blue economies also form an intrinsic part of a structural transformation for Timor-Leste. Special economic zones help numerous countries spur economic development, attract foreign investment, and foster productivity. An ambitious free trade zone encompassing Timor-Leste and Indonesia is under consideration. We must explore collaborative solutions with development partners to address this through technology transfer, concessional finance, and other opportunities for LDCs to close the gaps and facilitate low-carbon transition in energy infrastructure. In this context, I call on UNCTAD to dedicate special attention to LDCs within its new global alliance of the Special Economic Zone. Regional integration is a very important driver of structural transformation. The global environment deeply affects the prospect for attaining the SDGs and LDC graduation. While we acknowledge various initiatives that were offered for the LDCs, I want to highlight that predictable support on trade, concessional finance, and access to technology will be key for enabling structural transformation. Solidarity within the GC, G7+, and LDC group plays an important role. Pragmatic policies are adopted by some fragile states, and LDCs allow them to reduce poverty, lead investment in priority areas, and diversify their production and export. I thank the UN system, programs, funds, and specialized agencies for guiding and supporting Timor-Leste in moving towards graduation. We will require support in formulating a smooth transition strategy that is integrated into existing development plans. We appreciate support in strengthening institutional capacities to facilitate structural transformation and productive capacity. Challenges abound, and we count on your support to accelerate progress towards the SDGs. Thank you, and God bless us all.
I thank the President of Timor-Leste for his statement, and I have the honor of giving the floor to the President of the Republic of the Maldives, His Excellency Ibrahim Mohammed Soli, and I invite him to address the conference.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
In the name of God, the All-Merciful, Emir of the State of Qatar, Sheikh Mohammed and Thani.
Of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I stand here today representing a country that has graduated, the third country to do so. I'm happy to share the experience of our journey from LDC to middle-income country. It is a bittersweet story. While we celebrate the elevation of our people from the poverty that goes hand in hand with underdevelopment, we have been unable to fully realize the promise of prosperity that graduation from an LDC is said to assure. The problem lies in how the graduation process makes can regard to the underlying vulnerabilities that small states continue to possess in spite of improvements in their overall economic performance. Upon graduation, we found ourselves expending great effort to ensure that some of the benefits and special consideration we received as an LDC were not discontinued. We believe that some of these benefits should have remained in place to minimize the impacts of vulnerabilities small island developing countries such as ours experience. As many of you would be aware, such vulnerabilities arise from our geographical size and scatteredness, susceptibility to climate change, lack of economic diversification, inadequate access to development finance, and geopolitical shocks. For small island developing states such as Maldives, extreme vulnerabilities that linger well after graduation can have the disastrous consequences of wiping out decades of progress and development. The Asian tsunami of 2004 is a good case in point. It hit us while we were on the cusp of graduating from the LDCs. In addition to the tragic loss of countless lives, the economic impact of the tsunami was devastating, costing us almost 60% of our GDP. More recently, the COVID-19 pandemic made our country, a thriving upper middle income country, into a no-income country for 3 months. These 3 months without any foreign currency coming in. Foreign currency that is used to buy food, medicine, ensure social protection, cover universal health care, education, desalinate water, and provide electricity. While we were making good progress on post-pandemic recovery efforts, the recent conflict in Europe has created havoc in global energy markets, driving up commodity prices and disrupting supply chains. We are, once again, fighting to contain a reversal of our economic recovery. Mr. President, vulnerability is more than a measure of GDP. While the graduation criteria does include an economic vulnerability index, the reality is none of the graduating countries have ever satisfactorily met the EVI threshold. We believe that the work of a multidimensional vulnerability index that is presently ongoing in the General Assembly would greatly help in overcoming this challenge. At MVI would help look at the country's vulnerability beyond its GDP per capita and make an assessment of its resilience to shocks. Likewise, international financial institutions should move beyond the outdated metric of measuring development based, for the most part, of national income. Every country should be able to compete for development resources in a fair and equitable manner. This is how we ensure that the development gains achieved are sustainable, that there is no backsliding. Mr. President, climate change is the ultimate threat multiplier. It is all-encompassing. It is devastating. LDCs and SIDS are disproportionately affected. Despite this, Mr. President, we do not have access to adequate, sustainable, and predictable finance to take action to adapt to a change in climate, reduce emissions, and strengthen resilience to climate change impacts. We call on the developed world to do more, to fulfill their obligations in delivering on the collective finance goal of $100 billion per year and fast-track the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund as agreed at COP27 last November. And we are hopeful that we can make greater strides in the upcoming COP28 in UAE. LDCs must also work to build resilience from within. LDCs must do more to build good governance. The Maldives has been on a journey of democratic reform and consolidation since 2008. It has not been easy and is a work in continuous progress. Graduated LDCs must strengthen their governance and institutions to increase their capacity to implement policies and attract investment. Women and girls in LDCs continue to face barriers, such as lack of access to inclusive and quality education and digital skills, healthcare services, social protection, and decent work and opportunities in the labor market. The Maldives recognize that sustainable development cannot be achieved without the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women and girls in all facets of life. To achieve this goal, we need women in leadership roles and in decision-making positions. Mr. President, numerous crises are having negative effects on all nations. The LDCs are among those who suffer the most because of their numerous and unique vulnerabilities. The Maldives welcomed the Doha Programme of Action and pledges its strong support towards its full implementation. We call for immediate and urgent action. The time to act is now. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, the President of the Maldives, and I have the honor of now giving the floor to His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, from the outset, I want to express my deep gratitude to His Highness Tamim bin Ahmad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar, for consenting to host this meeting, this summit, and for the warm hospitality, support, and the outstanding facilities that he has placed at our disposal. Let me also commend the leadership of the least developed countries for conducting the work of the group, providing support and forward momentum for our efforts, even during very challenging times. We are grateful that you have actively protected the interest of the group in the process of implementing the program of action and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. President, Excellencies, Sierra Leone reiterates its commitment to the collective and shared responsibility to uphold the principles of the United Nations. We affirm our renewed solidarity in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals and to intensify cooperation among LDCs. The world has registered great transformation since the first United Nations LDC conference in 1981. With some countries graduating from LDC status, but persistent structural and global inequalities, the COVID-19 pandemic, recent geopolitical tensions, global economic headwinds, and downturns have reversed the gains of the LDCs and made it difficult to achieving SDGs. Consequently, most LDCs have failed to graduate to middle-income status. We acknowledge that 14% of the global population lives in the LDCs and continue to grapple with poverty, food insecurity, and malnutrition, poor health care, and other structural challenges that further expose them to vulnerabilities. We therefore must scale up international and national efforts to urgently address the plight of this group of countries. The collective, of course, of the G7+ that Sierra Leone currently chairs is aligned with the Doha Plan of Action, which recognizes the nexus of peace and development. 18 of the 20 G7+ countries are on the LDC list. This group of countries continue to be adversely affected and disproportionately affected too by the current global crisis. We therefore renew calls for debt relief and investment in connectivity and infrastructure that supports economic diversification. Additionally, regional and global actors must support ecosystems of shared peace while adhering to such aid effectiveness principles as the respect for country ownership and leadership. Only by doing that can we achieve what this year's theme promises, from potential to prosperity. The theme therefore resonates with Sierra Leone's aspiration. We are committed to implementing the national strategy that are consistent with the Doha Programme of Action for the decade 2022 to 2031. Programme of Action for the decade 2022-2031. We welcome the 6 focal areas that are aligned with Sierra Leone's current medium-term National Development Plan 2029-2023. It will also be mainstreamed in our successor National Development Plan 2024-2028. We will continue to advance the human capital development by investing in people through quality education, healthcare, and food security. Our recent gender equality and women's empowerment law sets a legal minimum for the representation and participation of women in the private and public sectors. We will continue to prioritize interventions that address vulnerabilities and exclusion among women, girls, youth, the aged, and the disabled. We will scale up radical inclusion, financial inclusion, skills development and job creation, and continue to pursue our national social protection policy. Through the 10-year National Innovation and Digital Strategy, we will continue to facilitate and support a vibrant national innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem for the public and the private sectors. In country, we will continue to implement our integrated national financing framework, scale up financial digitalization, and strengthen our national systems for effective resource mobilization and efficient use of public finances. We will accelerate efforts at addressing climate change and environmental degradation, diversifying our economic activities with renewed focus on boosting food production and agribusiness, tourism, fisheries, and light manufacturing. We can also generate significant regional trade volumes by implementing the African Continental Free Trade Area Initiative. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude by expressing our sincere hope that within a spirit of multilateralism, we can galvanize significant global efforts to effectively address the challenges confronting the LDCs. tackling those, we can ensure that no country is left behind in the race to meet the UN 2030 SDGs. Thank you for your kind attention.
أشكر رئيس جمهورية سيراليون ويشرفني الآن أن أدعو فخامة.
I thank the President of Sierra Leone for their statement, and I now have the honor of giving the floor to His Excellency Abdulatif Jamal Rashid, President of the Republic of Iraq. Sorry, the President of Sudan. In the name of God the Almighty, the All-Merciful,
شعب السودان.
I am pleased to speak on behalf of the people and government of Sudan. I would like to thank, on behalf of Sudan, the people and the government of the state of Qatar and His Highness, the Emir of the state of Qatar, for their immense generosity in hosting this fifth UN conference on the LDCs, and for all of their efforts to ensure the success of this conference. As we approach 2030, assessment of our achievement of the SDGs is an important step, not only to identify successes, but also to identify any challenges that may prevent us from achieving the aspirations of our people. Sudan has made significant progress towards the SDGs, which are of great importance. During this period, the transition government is deploying great efforts. Since 2019, the transition government adopted a budget that is founded on the SDGs for the first time in the history of Sudan. Resources devoted to health and education have gone beyond those devoted to security and defense. However, these internal resources that we have are not sufficient to achieve the SDGs. In addition, drawing external resources was not viable for the transition government because of the issue of indebtedness. The government has therefore deployed great efforts in negotiating with the American government in order to have Sudan removed from the list of terrorist sponsoring states. This is a first step for the initiative of heavily indebted countries. Sudan has also developed for the period 2021-2030 a framework for socio-economic development. This is an ambitious program with reforms and setting up a program for economic growth on the basis of the following pillars: for micro and macroeconomic stability, economic growth as a whole, investment in human capital, social development, equality of opportunity, governance, and strengthening institutional capacity. All of these are the priorities for the country in achieving the SDGs. Allow me now to express our appreciation for the efforts of the international community in support of the reforms that are currently underway in Sudan, such as for a new law for the central bank to help us achieve the first part of assessing the situation in to avoid the commercial banks. We have also increased spending in the areas of health, education, and investment. Also transparency and governance, financial aspects cover improving the environment for investment, a new law on investment, partnerships between the public and private sectors, and liberalization of the exchange systems. All of this enables human development in order to improve peace and sustainability. We are among the countries of the LDCs who are vulnerable to climate change. There have been great waves of refugees, and these are hampering the growth of our economy as well as our national security and the economy, infrastructure, and the services sector. Because of our geographic position and other factors, Sudan has been a source of shelter for refugees from many neighboring countries. This requires the international community to contribute to the development of these communities under the framework of burden sharing. I hope that my intervention has given you a clear vision of the challenges that our country is facing on its path towards development. Collective action that covers the efforts of the government and all of our partners is required in order for us to continue on this path. We will continue to include our regional international partners in our efforts to overcome these challenges and to try and find innovative solutions in order to bring about a better future and a better present for our people, to enable the transition to a period of political stability and reform, as well as political reform that will allow us to conclude the transition period and ensure that elections can be held. We have supported national, regional, and international efforts and have concluded a framework agreement. We hope that this will lead to stability, security, and development. I thank you. I thank His Excellency, President of the Transition Council of Sudan, of the Transitional Sovereign Council of the Republic of Sudan. And I now give the floor to His Excellency Yunus Menfi, President of the Presidential Council of the State of Libya.
صاحب السمو الشيخ تميم بن حمد الثاني أمير دولة قطر رئيس مؤتمر.
Your Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar, President of the 5th United Nations Conference for the LDCs, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure at the outset of congratulating the brotherly state of Qatar on its election as the president of the 5th United Nations Conference for the LDCs. We are certain that Qatar will ensure the brilliant success of this conference and the achievement of its objectives. Mr. President, we meet today for the 5th time within the framework of the efforts of the United Nations in support of the least developed countries as the world undergoes economic, healthful, and other crises that affect us all. The results of these crises are increases in poverty, hunger and malnutrition, human rights violations, armed conflicts, and environmental deterioration, as well as climate change and natural disasters. All this requires us to strengthen international mechanisms in order to build peaceful and just societies free from fear and violence. Mr. President, despite the many challenges and obstacles, we're aware that LDCs are capable of ensuring a better future for their people. Indeed, The LDCs possess significant resource potential, which can allow for economic development if appropriate measures are taken to achieve this. Mr. President, my country supports the Doha Program of Action for the decade 2022-2031, which strengthens commitments in favor of the LDCs and establishes development projects that allow for a rapid, sustainable, and inclusive growth, access to sustainable financing between countries. We also reaffirm the right of these countries to access the knowledge and technology available to reduce the scientific gap, to have access to communications and electricity. This would reduce energy production costs, which is one of the main drivers of progress and development. In this regard, we call on the international community to prioritize multidimensional support that would facilitate the implementation and realization of the Doha Program of Action, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. We also call on the Office of the High Representative to set up a comprehensive roadmap for the implementation of the Doha Program of Action while ensuring international support and the necessary resources. In the context of global solidarity, we call for the establishment of a global emergency fund to confront epidemics, natural disasters, and the impacts of wars, and to ensure the sustainability of development projects, as well as making sure that medicine, food, and vaccines are available to all. Despite the exceptional circumstances my country is experiencing, we are working to alleviate the burden of landlocked countries by facilitating trade through our country and by providing subventions as well as direct investments to nonprofit support. Ladies and gentlemen, illicit migration remains a major concern for all, as this exhausts the resources of the LDCs and results in brain drain. It also brings about dangerous demographic changes and is a burden for LDCs. We call on the countries of origin and transit in Africa to encourage refugees to stay in their countries by setting up real development projects that assure them a decent life, by reducing tensions in the Sahel region and in the Mediterranean in order to prevent resentment that leads to extremism and transnational organized crime. These goals require a more equitable financial system that would alleviate the debt burden for the least developed countries and help them emerge from poverty. Mr. President, since the establishment of the LDC category in 1971, these countries continue to require assistance, and we ask why further progress has not been made. We must think about their trajectory in the past in order to generate a vision for the future and lay the foundations for a sustainable and inclusive recovery. To conclude, we once again reaffirm our commitment to the noble objectives of the United Nations when it comes to the LDCs, the success of efforts in this area requires collective support from all international partners so that we can achieve our desired goal. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the President of the Presidential Council of the State of Libya, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Hakainde Hichilema, President of the Republic of Zambia, to address the conference.
Thank you very much, Your Highness, the Emir of Qatar, Your Excellency, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Zambia joins other leaders in congratulating the State of Qatar for hosting this important conference on LDCs, and in particular to congratulate the Emir of Qatar for being the president of this particular LDC platform. There are many questions that are being asked, which we ask ourselves as LDCs. What is locking us up? What is keeping us at the bottom? What are the real issues that we should address for us to move from the potential we all have to prosperity? These are genuine and relevant questions. Really, we need to agree on a combination of solutions to respond to these hard questions, and it's important that we do respond to them. It is important for us to recognize that, amongst other factors, we need to work in partnership amongst ourselves, with each other, and indeed with the developed world. Coupled with a collective resolve to foster greater economic and social development, and indeed to make our aspirations of a Doha Programme of Action attainable, it is important that we work together as a team. There is, however, still need to step up our collective efforts aimed at galvanizing multi-stakeholder engagements at all levels, including with the youth. We heard from the youth this morning, vulnerable communities, the private sector included in there, and other non-state actors, because they are all important for us to effectively implement the program of action which we all agreed. Mr. President, Zambia considers 2023 a critical year for strengthening our resolve to address some of the key challenges that we face, particularly given the scheduled landmarks that the UN is engaged in. We are part of that UN. We have to devise workable solutions that will help reduce debt vulnerabilities, mitigate climate change, and the challenges, particularly the challenges around economic shocks. In particular, the SDG Summit, Mr. President, in September, we will need to rededicate our efforts to collectively agree on concrete steps and actions to get back on track in implementing the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, we appreciate the catalytic role that the UN plays in all these issues, including our South-to-South cooperation. Zambia, Mr. President, therefore aligns with your call to reform the international financial system so that it supports sustainable, inclusive, and equitable economic growth for job creation as well as creating business opportunities for our people. Not particularly to eradicate poverty. I want to make a serious comment here, but to create wealth. And when we create wealth, we'll be able to tackle poverty as well. I think this is a very important aspect. Poverty reduction alone does not grow our economies, but wealth creation does. It is important, therefore, that we also look at the issues around food security. And for these things to happen, Mr. President, we need more capital flows into our countries, LDCs, number one. Number two, when the capital flows into our countries, it must come at a fair price. LDCs pay a higher price of capital than others around the world. Why should this continue? No, we should change it. Mr. President, we need to continue our fight against climate change, as I've stated already. And we discussed this at COP27. We continue to do that. We continue to do that before COP27. And the developed countries, Mr. President, should meet their pledge of $100 billion per year in climate change finance. This is important. This is a matter of credibility with regards to meeting our commitments as a global community. We are therefore hopeful that COP28 in the United Arab Emirates this year will be the game changer with regard to actioning on commitments that are made. We expect progress on the collective quantified goal on climate finance, doubling of finance, and more commitments to clean energy transitions to keep alive our reduction in temperature increase so that we can mitigate the climate change negative effects, at least reduce the emissions by 2050. Very important. Mr. President, Zambia has placed a premium on ownership and primary responsibility in the implementation of the Doha Program of Action. We are committed to that. We have done so by aligning our national development agenda to the program's overarching the goal of structural transformation. Mr. President, in particular promoting value addition, very important to us, particularly to products from the mining and agriculture sectors, promoting investment in energy, transport, education, health, water, and water harvesting in particular to allow us to improve agricultural production through irrigation as well. Encouraging partnerships for technology transfer, digital collectivity, and growth of small and medium enterprises is important to us, including the efforts, improving efforts towards ensuring environmental sustainability and reducing the associated risks, Mr. President. May I say that innovative technological development, fair trade, and improved and increased market access are key to success, Mr. President. As peers in the LDCs, we should also continue working to resolve our common challenges by leveraging on those partnerships that support our efforts to graduate from where we are to a higher level. With such positive and deliberate efforts, we, the LDCs, Mr. President, can and shall indeed move from potential to prosperity. Zambia is desirous and ready to do so, Mr. President, and I believe others are equally doing the same. We are moving and look forward to working closely with our partners, yourselves, to realize the development of our country, and in order to graduate from the LDC category to a middle-income country. And that's our view. That's a desire we have for other countries as well, working together as a team, because humanity is one, and we cannot solve problems of one country and expect that to be safe from the difficulties arising from other countries. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the President of the Republic of Zambia, and I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Mohammed Wuld Sheikh Al Ghazwani, President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, to address the conference. Thank you very much. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Your Highness, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, I would like to begin by congratulating His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani on hosting this fifth episode of the UN Conference on the Least Developed Countries. We thank him and thank everything that has been provided for us since we have arrived in terms of warm hospitality. I would also like to thank Mr. Antonio Guterres and thank the UN agencies mandated to work on the least developed countries for the admirable achievements throughout the last decade, and also for developing the Doha Program of Action 2022-2031. This fifth conference is held during exceptional global circumstances where armed conflicts are on the rise, and similarly violence, extremism, environmental challenges, and the disastrous impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the war in Ukraine, all take place. These multiple crises have led to retractions and harm that has affected society and the economy and has reversed the gains achieved by the international community in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Therefore, there was the dire need for this conference, which is a valuable opportunity to promote and reinforce the international commitment to achieve the Doha Program of Action based on the lessons learned from the implementation of the previous Plan of Action, the Istanbul Plan of Action. Everyone knows that the LDC group include more than 1 billion people. The LDC economies suffer structural imbalances that are further complicated by the burden of debt and the low access to international investment and the impact of security and climate challenges. LDCs desperately need the support of the international community in order to increase its chances of achieving Agenda 2030. It is true that the international support for the LDCs has contributed to achieving some positive results, such as, for example, 3 states, not many states, have been able to graduate from this category. However, this limited number is itself proof of the need to multiply international efforts in support of LDC's pursuit of the SDGs, in particular SDG 1, to eliminate poverty. We in the Islamic Republic of Mauritania have prioritized the fight against poverty, vulnerability, and exclusion. We have based our development strategy on these priorities, and we have built a social welfare net and worked to implement structural reforms and diversify the economy and create a more resilient economy and provide job opportunities and added value and improving our economic governance. Our annual growth has reached 5.3% in 2022 compared to 2.4% in 2021. We are also focusing on improving our productive sectors through diversifying our agriculture and improving our animal and marine resources and achieving self-sufficiency in terms of nutrition. At the same time, we are working to firmly establish our democracy and the rule of law and improving the situation of human rights. In this context, we were able, in a volatile regional context, to achieve peace and stability in our territories, and we continue to combat desertification and to gradually move towards clean energy. In conclusion, I wish all the success for this conference and for the Doha Program of Action, and may the peace of God be upon you. I thank the President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, and I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Andrzej Duda, President of the Republic of Poland, to address the conference.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is fortunate that we can meet at the UN conference dealing with such an important issue as aid to the least developed countries. I appear before you as a president of the country on whose borders a brutal neo-colonial war is now taking place. Yes, the Russian aggression against Ukraine is a neo-colonial war. The empire has invited a neighboring country to seize its lands and its hidden wealth and profit from it. But the empire is also kidnapping people, including children, and sending them deep into Russia. Ukrainian estimates that more than 100,000 children have been abducted by the Russians. And those who refuse to submit to its will, the empire kills. Does this not sound familiar to you, ladies and gentlemen? Has this not been the history of many of your countries? I'm open about it because Poland itself was a victim of brutal policies pursued by neighboring empires. Today, we are counted among the developed countries. But due to our dramatic past experiences, I feel obliged to speak out loud about the need for solidarity between the developed North and the global South. This is likewise an obligation to oppose scenarios where one strong state seeks to dominate other countries by imposing its will on them or by restoring to an overt assault. Poland advocates cooperation of equal sovereign states, advocates multilateralism. For history is teaching us that only equality of all states before international law and absolute adherence thereto are best safeguards of peace, security, and economic development. Obviously, it is not easy to achieve, but there is no third way. Poland's stance has been and continues to reaffirm the primacy of international law in relations among states. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm fully aware of the challenges arising in other parts of the world. Moreover, I'm also conscious of the expectations that the countries of the global South have vis-à-vis the rich North, which I feel I am representing. I realize that the scale of the challenges is enormous. It's not only the Russian war in Ukraine, but also the protracted instability in Yemen, Syria, or Afghanistan. It is also the growing number of refugees and internally displaced persons. We are talking about over 100 million people, most of them women and children. It's also natural disasters such as severe droughts and floods in Pakistan and South Sudan, and earthquakes in Syria and Turkey. Finally, it's rising energy and food prices, which combined with the still felt economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic mean that the number of people suffering from malnutrition exceeded a staggering figure of 800 million in 2021, whereas the number of people experiencing acute hunger has almost tripled in the last 3 years to reach in excess of 300 million. These are alarming figures. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand that the least developed countries may fear that a war on the borders of the European Union would further reduce the already insufficient resources available to them. I understand this anxiety because it would be awfully bad news, especially when the European Union is the world's biggest donor of development aid. In 2021 alone, the European Community earmarked to this end the amount of 70 billion euro, which represents almost 50% of all global development aid. As President of the EU's 6 largest member states, I will strive to make sure that the challenges faced by the least developed countries remain high on the EU list of priorities. That's why I support the EU decision to allocate more than 2 billion euro to help developing countries, mainly in Africa, fight hunger. In addition, we as Poland are making efforts to rebuild the supply chains of Ukrainian grain in order to alleviate the food crisis, which has mainly affected the least developed countries. In stark opposition to the Russian narrative, it's precisely President Putin's decision to launch an aggression on Ukraine that comes as a heavy blow to global economy. It impedes global GDP growth and pushes up prices of many goods. Unfortunately, economic impact of the war are felt more and more distinctly, not only in Europe, but on other continents, including Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and least developed countries in particular. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in view of the current particularly difficult situation for the least developed countries, Poland is convinced of the need to make further efforts to increase the resilience of their economies and to support the development of their internal markets. This is why we led to our support to the Doha Programme of Action for the least developed countries for the decade 2021-2031. I do hope that this will contribute to visible reduction of disparities, to the harnessing of the potential represented by women and girls on the way to economic and social development of their respective countries, and also to the engagement of local communities for lasting peace and sustainable growth. We also realize the growing need for long-term support to reduce the vulnerability of developing countries to external crises, food, energy, and climate. On the last point here, noteworthy is the idea of just transition, where economic changes needed to protect the climate should take human dimension into account. In addition, for many years we have been implementing assistance projects in the areas of education, access to healthcare, and support for entrepreneurship. So I would like to underscore that we are open to cooperation and are happy to share our solution and experiences. To this end, we are developing the network of our diplomatic missions, among others, in Africa. We are determined to develop political contacts as well as economic and scientific ones. We do believe that through broad cooperation, exchange of knowledge and experiences, we can effectively assist the least developed countries. Moreover, Polish companies have offered tried and tested price competitive farming equipment as well as ICT solutions sustainable to be used in financial and insurance sectors. Ladies and gentlemen, I do hope that the debate at this year's conference will be another symbol of international solidarity and will allow concrete plans and decisions to be drawn up to strengthen world trade and, above all, to improve the situation in the countries that need it most. Thank you very much for your attention and the opportunity to speak at this important forum. Thank you.
أشكر رئيس جمهورية بولندا وأدعو فخامة السيد.
I thank the President of the Republic of Poland, and I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Evariste Ndayishimiye, President of the Republic of Burundi, to address the conference.
Thank you, Mr. President. Au nom du Seigneur, le Tout-Puissant.
In the name of the Lord, the All-Merciful, the Almighty, Your Excellency, the President of the Fifth Conference, Your Majesties, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, distinguished guests. I would like to begin by once again expressing the most friendly greetings of the people of Burundi. I also express my gratitude once again to the state of Qatar for its hospitality and its growing leadership on the international arena, which is reflected in the adoption of the Doha Program of Action. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Burundi is a country affected by conflict, and we have already adopted the Doha Program of Action, which focuses on 6 priority areas. Areas that support the efforts already undertaken by the government of Burundi in its entirety. Indeed, the first priority of the Doha Program of Action for the LDCs, investing in the people of the least developed countries, reinforces the initiatives of the government of Burundi, which has already based its poverty reduction strategy on human development through its slogan, "May every mouth have something to eat and may every pocket have money," and by involving all citizens in development activities. In addition, by combining the demographic dividend with skills development, the Burundian government, it should be highlighted, has placed young people and women at the heart of development through a major economic and youth employment empowerment program, a youth investment bank, and this is in addition to a women's bank and a financial and technical assistance program to production cooperatives in each district in the country, to name just a few. Regarding the second priority area of leveraging the power of science, technology, and innovation to combat multidimensional vulnerabilities, we're pleased by the momentum that the government of Burundi has already achieved in this area by investing in infrastructure through the deployment of a fiber optic network throughout the country's territory and by making digitization a priority in order to take advantage of digital growth. On supporting structural transformation, which is the driver of prosperity, in Burundi, agriculture is the most growth-promoting sector. This is the reason for the efforts made by the government to promote the agricultural sector through a change of attitudes first and foremost in order to make the profession of farmer a profession of the future. Thus, all sectors of Burundian society have been mobilized to strengthen the agricultural value chain. Foreign investors, too, are welcome in this chain as part of what we have called investor agricultural cooperative partnerships in order to facilitate the efficient mobilization of labor for economic operators. The fifth priority calls on us to counter climate change and environmental deterioration. In that context, allow me to cite, by way of example, a program launched by the Burundian government entitled Ewe Burundi Arambaye, Burundi Covered, if you translate it literally. This program seeks to tackle climate change through reforestation, civic education on environmental protection, and agroforestry in agricultural environments. Finally, the last priority of mobilizing international solidarity, global partnerships, and innovative tools and instruments on the path to sustainable graduation gives us hope for the least developed countries because there is strength in unity. I believe that today the whole world has its eyes on the state of Qatar. Now is the time for advanced countries to realize that it is time to support the development initiatives and programs in our countries in order to boost our economies. This is a particular hope for Burundi, for the international community, and all the other LDCs, which are looking forward already to the next 10 years. And I can assure you that Burundi does not see itself as a poor country. We are not a poor country because we have ample development opportunities. What we lack is startup capital. I would thus like to conclude with a sincere appeal to advanced countries to support us on this path to significantly reducing our degree of vulnerability and help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the President of Burundi, and now I'll give the floor to His Majesty King Mswati III, Head of State of the Kingdom of Eswatini, to address the conference.
His Highness the Emir of the State of Qatar, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, UN Secretary General, Chairperson of the Group of Least Developed Countries, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so delighted to join other Heads of State and Government at this 5th UN Conference for Least Developed Countries in this beautiful city of Doha. We are meeting here after the world has experienced natural disasters, conflicts, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic, as we extend our sympathy to all those who have been affected. Let me also take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to His Highness, the Emir of the State of Qatar, government, and the people of this country for the warm hospitality extended to all of us. We also wish to thank Qatar for being such a good host and organizer of this conference. This meeting provides an opportunity for us to prepare progress reports on the status of the attainment of the SDGs to the UN General Assembly. However, we note that we still have many challenges in several of these goals, such as poverty alleviation, quality education, health, energy, job creation, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, just to mention a few. Although the kingdom has passed the stage of being a low-developed country, the challenges we face as a weekly income remain similar. We note with concern that some of the countries that had previously graduated from the LDC's category have been greatly hit by the health and socio-economic crisis. There is an urgent need to ensure that these countries are supported to enable them to remain in their elevated status and are cushioned against external shocks. We now found ourselves facing daunting challenges in creating an enabling environment for our people to live in, as Eswatini has experienced a massive reduction in development aid assistance. We therefore appeal to the international community to give us more financial and technical support in order for us to achieve these targets. The Kingdom of Eswatini has devised a post-COVID-19 economic recovery plan with the support of the UN. A part of our plan is strengthening the health sector systems through, but not limited to, hiring of medical personnel so that every citizen has access to quality health services. We further invite investment in the pharmaceutical sector to set up plant in the kingdom. We are also establishing the National Agriculture Development Fund, which will support smaller-holder farmers and aspiring Emaswati with skills and capital for green technologies and farming startup parks. The Kingdom has also made significant efforts to develop knowledge-based systems for addressing poverty-related challenges. The Kingdom of Eswatini is climatically vulnerable and has experienced significant variations in rainfall patterns, higher temperatures, and increases in frequency and intensity of severe weather events such as droughts, floods, and cyclones. Although Eswatini only emits 0.007% of global carbon emissions, we have committed to climate change mitigation and adaptation through an ambitious national determined contribution. Further, the energy sector provides several opportunities for investment as the country seeks to attain its energy security. Our government is also pursuing the development of a strategic oil reserve facility to secure our fuel sufficiency, and we are looking for partners to supply the product. These projects are aimed at creating decent jobs for our people, which is one of the key targets for SDGs. Digital transformation is a driving force for the innovative, inclusive, and sustainable growth that has reshaped the global economy. There is an urgent need to achieve universal broadband access, particularly in LDCs. The ICT sector is therefore plays an important role in creating future jobs, namely cloud computing, digital marketing, machine learning, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, software development, among others. Integral to this is the development of research institutions that can help mainstream technology and harness innovation to uplift our people. Eswatini has invested considerable in this regard. Last year, through a partnership with the UNDP, we launched a youth empowerment program which will focus on economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, education, skills development, health, and the well-being of young people. We believe this program, which has the support of the private sector, will make a significant impact on job creation in the country. In conclusion, the Kingdom of Eswatini will continue to work on its ambitious objectives of transforming the economy towards a self-sustained development and the attainment of the SDGs. I thank you. May Almighty God bless us all.
I would like to thank His Majesty King of Eswatini, and now I give the floor to His Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, President of the Federal Republic of Somalia, to address the conference. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and privilege to address you all at this important 5th United Nations Conference on Least Developed Countries in this beautiful, brotherly state of Qatar. Indeed, we must ensure that the use of this opportunity to truly reflect and act together on these policies and strategies that can accelerate sustainable development in places where international assistance is needed the most, and to tap the full potential of the least developed countries so that we pave the way for progress and prosperity of our people going forward. I thank the UN and all its agencies and the State of Qatar for joining forces to deliver this crucial timely global discussion on what must now be a call to action to achieve tangible results in delivering sustainable development in the least developed countries. Accordingly, in this age of global independence and common challenges and opportunities, we cannot and must not leave anyone behind if we are serious about the sustainable development and progress of most vulnerable people in the world today. There is abundant untapped potential in the least developed countries like Somalia, but the challenge remains turning this into progress and prosperity for the people who are among the poorest in the world is standing tall. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, historical and modern challenges for development in Somalia, while having a great potential and prospects for development, one of the reasons Somalia has struggled with sustainable development is legacy of a prolonged conflict and political instability in the past. We are now successfully addressing both through dialogue and ongoing inclusive state-building process. We are also collectively and successfully fighting the last remaining pocket of international terrorism in Somalia and in the region, in partnership with our people and international partners as well. However, our challenges have been compounded by the impact of climate change, which is exacerbating drought and food insecurity. This requires urgent and better coordinated global response to mitigate and adapt to in order to ensure lives and livelihoods of the most vulnerable in our country is protected. The COVID-19 pandemic impacted Somalia heavily, and we learned the centrality of a social protection system to cope with the future global shocks. Accordingly, we are working tirelessly to grow the economy, create jobs, and raise domestic revenue, but there is not yet the strong financial social safety net that other developed nations have enjoyed. However, there was and is a strong sense of community, resilience, and burden sharing like in most of other least developed countries that helped us cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. This sense of community must be recognized as a strength and acknowledged in the design of all international development projects through prioritizing local needs, expertise, and job creation as emphasized in Somalia's National Development Plan. Indeed, this is the most effective way to ensure developmental impact and strengthen the social protection in the most vulnerable communities across the least developed countries. Social protection does not and should not mean handouts. It is about creating opportunities for self-respect, dignity, and sufficiency which build on the existing communal resources and resilience. In Somalia, we are determined to make the leap from simple potential to prosperity in a manner that benefits our people and play to our national strengths. We are already working hard in national economic reform program to achieve debt relief through the highly indebted poor countries initiative